Welcome to Timeless Bedtime Tales, where history whispers and night carries the stories of forgotten worlds. Far beyond the reach of ordinary memory, before maps were certain and before time was measured in years, there was an island resting quietly in the great ocean. The people who lived there did not call it Atlantis with pride or mystery. To them, it was simply home. Atlantis rested where the sea was calm most days, where the water moved like a slow breath, rising and falling without urgency. The air was soft and carried the scent of salt and flowering trees. Even at night, the island felt awake in a gentle way, as though it listened more than it spoke. As the sun lowered itself into the ocean each evening, Atlantis changed its rhythm. The bright stone buildings, pale and smooth, reflected the fading light until they glowed softly, then slowly dimmed. Wide canals carried seawater through the city, their surfaces turning dark and glassy as the sky deepened into blue. The people of Atlantis did not rush at this hour. They had learned long ago that night was not something to conquer, but something to move with. Lamps were lit one by one, made of warm metals and filled with oils pressed from flowering plants. Their light did not fight the darkness. It blended with it. Homes were built in circles, echoing the shape of the island itself. Stone pathways curved gently, never sharp, guiding footsteps without effort. The sound of sandals on stone was soft, almost lost beneath the quiet lapping of water against the canal walls. In the heart of the city stood the Great Hall of Learning. It was not grand in height, but wide and open, designed to let air and sound move freely. Its columns were smooth from centuries of passing hands. At this hour, scholars remained inside, seated comfortably on woven mats, reading tablets etched with knowledge gathered from many lands. They spoke in low voices, often not at all. Words were used carefully in Atlantis. Silence was valued just as deeply. Outside, the gardens were settling. Trees with silver-green leaves rustled faintly as the evening breeze passed through them. Flowers closed slowly, as if remembering the sun. Water channels guided fresh streams through the soil, keeping the land alive without force. Children were already asleep, their breathing steady and deep. They had spent the day learning not only numbers and stars, but patience, balance, and listening. In Atlantis, wisdom was taught gently, like water shaping stone. Along the outer rings of the city, near the harbor, ships rested against their moorings. These vessels were not built for conquest. Their hulls were broad and stable, designed for long journeys and safe returns. Sailcloth lay folded, and ropes hung loose, unmoving in the still air. The sea beyond the harbor was calm tonight. Moonlight spilled across its surface, creating a slow path of silver that stretched toward the horizon. The people believed the sea remembered everything it touched. They treated it with respect, never shouting, never taking more than needed. High above the city, on a gentle rise of land, the watchers began their nightly walk. These were not guards in the sense of fear or threat. They were keepers of time, trained to observe the stars, the tides, and the subtle movements of the earth beneath their feet. Their robes moved softly as they walked, brushing against the stone. Each step was measured, unhurried. They paused often, looking up at the sky where constellations revealed themselves slowly, one by one. The people of Atlantis believed the sky spoke in patterns, not words. And so they watched. As the night deepened, the city grew quieter. Doors were closed without sound. Lamps were dimmed, not extinguished. The canals reflected the stars, turning the city into a mirror of the heavens. In one quiet home near the inner canal, an elder sat alone, listening to the water. His hair was white, his movements slow. He had lived long enough to feel the island's changes, though they were subtle and patient. He did not fear them. He closed his eyes and breathed, in time with the tide. Atlantis, at this hour, was not a place of mystery or legend. It was simply a living, breathing city resting. The stones held warmth from the day. The sea hummed softly against the land. The air carried calm into every corner. And as the island slept, it dreamed, not of power, not of greatness, but of balance. The balance between land and sea. Between knowledge and rest. Between memory and forgetting. The night continued, unbroken and gentle, as Atlantis remained still beneath the stars. The night moved forward without sound, as it always did in Atlantis. Time here was not something that pressed or hurried. It flowed, much like the water through the canals, steady and patient, never demanding attention. Beyond the inner city, where the stone gave way to softer ground, the fields rested under moonlight. These lands fed the people, though they were never pushed to produce more than they wished. Rows of grain bent gently in the night breeze, their tips brushing one another in quiet conversation. Fruit trees stood heavy with ripening offerings, their branches supported by smooth wooden frames shaped over generations. Small streams wound through the fields, guided carefully by hand-carved channels. Even now, at night, water moved with purpose, gliding around stones, nourishing roots, disappearing softly into the earth. The people of Atlantis believed water should always be moving, never trapped, never forced. Farther still, where the land rose toward low hills, animals slept. There were no fences here, only understanding. Creatures knew where they belonged. Hooves and paws rested on cool soil. Breathing slowed. The island held them all equally. Back within the city, the great hall of learning had grown quieter. One by one, scholars rolled their tablets closed and placed them carefully into alcoves built into the walls. These alcoves were worn smooth by centuries of use. Knowledge was not hidden in Atlantis. It was kept gently, like a shared memory. A few remained, not reading now, but simply sitting. Listening. Feeling the night settle into their bones. Lamps flickered faintly, their flames steady, as if aware of the calm surrounding them. At the center of the island stood the Temple of Balance. It was not raised high or adorned with gold. It was low and circular, open to the sky. At its center lay a shallow pool fed by underground springs. The water there was always still. Those who entered the temple at night did so barefoot. Stone floors were cool, grounding. A small group had gathered now, seated around the pool in silence. Their reflections shimmered softly on the water's surface, blending faces with stars. No words were spoken. None were needed. The people of Atlantis believed that too many words disturbed the deeper truths. At night, listening was enough. Above them, clouds drifted slowly, thin and pale. The moon passed behind them and emerged again, unbothered. Light shifted across the city, changing shadows, softening edges. Atlantis did not resist these changes. It welcomed them. In a home near the harbor, a young navigator slept, his dreams shaped by distant horizons. During the day, he studied the movement of stars and currents. At night, his mind wandered freely, guided by memory rather than maps. His breath rose and fell like the tide he knew so well. Nearby, and artisans slept beside unfinished work. Smooth stone lay beneath careful hands, half-shaped into something useful and beautiful. There was no rush to complete it. Tomorrow would come, and the next day, and the next. Atlantis did not fear tomorrow. The watchers continued their slow path along the upper walkways. One paused, sensing something subtle beneath his feet, not danger, not change, but movement. The island was alive. It always had been. It breathed, stretched, adjusted itself as all living things do. He placed his palm against the stone, feeling its warmth, its quiet strength. Then he moved on, satisfied. In the deep channels beneath the city, water flowed through carefully carved passages, cooling the stone, carrying whispers of the sea into the heart of Atlantis. These channels were ancient, older than any living person. They had been shaped slowly, patiently, never forcing the land, only guiding it. The people believed the island had chosen them, not the other way around. As the night reached its deepest point, the city seemed to pause entirely. Even the sea grew still, its surface smooth and dark, reflecting the sky like polished glass. Stars appeared brighter now, sharper, as though leaning closer. Somewhere, far beyond the horizon, currents shifted. Winds changed direction gently. None of this was sudden. None of it demanded attention. Atlantis slept through it all. And in its sleep, the island remembered its beginnings. Long ago, when the first settlers arrived, guided by instinct rather than certainty, they had listened to the land. They had built slowly. They had learned when to stop. That memory lingered in the stone, in the water, in the quiet spaces between buildings. The elder by the canal stirred slightly, adjusting his posture. He opened his eyes for a moment, gazing at the reflection of the moon in the water. It trembled faintly as a fish passed beneath the surface. He smiled, barely. Nothing was wrong. Nothing needed fixing. Everything was exactly as it should be. The night continued to unfold, layer by layer, gentle and unbroken. The city breathed. The sea listened. The stars watched. And Atlantis remained, peaceful and wise, resting deeply in the arms of the ancient ocean. The deepest part of the night passed quietly, without announcement. In Atlantis, moments did not arrive loudly. They simply appeared, settled, and moved on when their time was complete. A soft wind drifted in from the open sea, weaving through the harbor and into the canals. It carried the scent of distant water and unseen places. The lantern flames leaned gently with it, never flickering wildly, only acknowledging its presence before returning to stillness. Along the inner ring of the city, the water in the canals shifted slowly, responding to the distant pull of the moon. Small ripples traced the stone edges, touching them again and again, as if reminding the city that it was never truly separate from the ocean. In the quiet homes, sleep deepened. Breathing became slower, heavier, more even. Dreams softened, losing sharp edges, becoming more like feelings than stories. The people of Atlantis did not cling to dreams. They let them pass through, like water through open hands. Somewhere near the gardens, a night bird stirred, adjusting its feathers. It did not call out. It only listened. The island listened with it. Beneath the city, far below the stone pathways and flowing channels, the earth rested. It held the weight of Atlantis easily, without strain. There were no cracks, no tension. The island and the sea had learned how to exist together, each allowing the other space. Long ago, the elders had taught that nothing truly remains unchanged. But change did not have to be violent. It could be slow, almost invisible, like the movement of stars across the sky. At the edge of the city, where stone met sand, the tide crept forward and then retreated, leaving faint patterns behind. These patterns would be gone by morning, erased without effort. No one would mourn them. They had served their purpose. In the Temple of Balance, the water in the central pool remained perfectly still. The few who sat nearby had grown drowsy, their bodies leaning slightly, supported by the cool stone. Some had closed their eyes. Others gazed upward, watching the stars drift across the open circle above. Thoughts became fewer now. Words lost their shape. Awareness softened into something broader, quieter. The watchers completed another slow circuit and paused at the highest point of the island. From there, the city spread out below them in gentle curves, lamps glowing like scattered embers. Beyond it all, the ocean stretched endlessly, dark and calm. One of the watchers felt a subtle shift, not beneath his feet this time, but within his chest. A sense of time moving forward, unbothered by human concern. He acknowledged it with a slow breath and let it go. Atlantis had always trusted time. In a modest home near the outer ring, a stoneworker dreamed of water flowing through his hands, shaping itself into something useful without force. His fingers twitched slightly as he slept, remembering the rhythm even in rest. Near the harbor, ropes creaked softly as ships adjusted to the tide. Wood pressed against wood, a familiar sound, comforting. These ships had carried knowledge, not armies. Stories, not fear. They would do so again when the time was right. For now, they rested. Above the island, clouds thinned until the sky opened wide again. The stars seemed closer, brighter, as though leaning down to observe the quiet harmony below. The moon hung low, its reflection stretching and breaking gently across the water. Atlantis did not shine. It did not announce itself. It simply existed, balanced and aware. The elder by the canal shifted again, this time settling more deeply into stillness. His breathing matched the water's movement, slow and patient. He no longer watched the reflection. He no longer needed to. The night had wrapped itself fully around the island, holding it in a steady embrace. Nothing stirred with urgency. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing was missing. The city, the sea, the sky, all moved together in quiet agreement. And as the hours continued to drift, Atlantis remained suspended between waking and sleep, between memory and forgetting, floating gently in the ancient rhythm of the world. The night began to loosen its grip, though it did so gently, almost apologetically. In Atlantis, even the approach of morning was soft, like a slow exhale after long rest. Far out at sea, where the horizon could not be clearly seen, the water shifted in tone. Darkness thinned there first, turning from deep black to a muted blue. The island felt this change before it could be seen. Stone cooled slightly. Air moved with a quieter purpose. Within the city, sleep still held firmly. No bells marked the hour. No voices stirred the silence. Atlantis allowed its people to wake when their bodies were ready, not when time demanded it. The canals reflected the changing sky, their surfaces slowly losing the stars one by one. A single ripple passed through one channel, then faded, leaving the water smooth again. Nothing lingered. In the gardens, leaves trembled faintly as the breeze shifted direction. Flowers that had closed through the night remained still, patient, waiting for warmth rather than light. The soil beneath them held moisture carefully, having learned over centuries how to give without excess. In the temple of balance, the small gathering had thinned. Some had returned home without sound. Others had remained, resting against the stone walls, eyes closed, breathing slow. The pool at the center reflected the sky's pale transformation, blue blending into silver. The watchers ended their long vigil and moved toward their resting places. They walked without fatigue, their steps guided by habit and trust. Each knew the others were present, even without seeing them. In Atlantis, presence did not require proof. At the harbor, a seabird landed softly on a wooden post, folding its wings and settling. It did not cry out. It simply observed, head tilted, watching the water shift beneath it. Inside the homes, dreams began to thin. They loosened their hold, releasing sleepers gently back toward awareness. Some dreamed of waves. Some of light through stone. Others dreamed of nothing at all. The elder by the canal opened his eyes as the sky softened. He did not move immediately. He simply noticed. The faint coolness of the stone beneath him. The steady sound of water. The quiet certainty that the island still held. He rose slowly, joints moving without complaint, and placed his hand once more against the canal wall. The stone was familiar. It always would be. Atlantis had learned something that many places never did, that greatness was not found in growth without limit, but in knowing when to remain still. As the first light brushed the highest stones of the city, lamps dimmed naturally, their purpose complete. Smoke rose faintly from a few hearths where early risers prepared warm drinks. No rush followed. Morning was welcomed, not chased. Beyond the outer fields, the sea breathed in, then out. Tides adjusted themselves without effort. The island shifted with them, never resisting, never clinging. If one listened closely, very closely, Atlantis could be heard not as sound, but as rhythm. A steady, ancient rhythm that had nothing to prove and nowhere to go. And though ages would pass, and though memory would soften and blur, this rhythm would remain. Not as stone or city or name, but as balance. As quiet understanding. As rest. The day would come. The night would return. And Atlantis would continue, calm and patient, held gently between sea and sky. The light continued to grow, but slowly, as though the world itself was careful not to wake Atlantis too quickly. Morning here did not arrive with sharp edges. It unfolded. The sky shifted from pale blue to a softer silver, and then to a gentle warmth that touched the highest points of the island first. Stone caught this light and held it quietly, passing it along the curved paths and low walls without glare. In the canals, reflections changed again. Where stars had once rested, there was now sky. Where darkness had lingered, there was clarity. The water accepted each change without resistance. Some doors opened slightly. Not wide. Just enough to let air move through. Curtains stirred. Footsteps began, light and unhurried, barely louder than breath. Atlantis did not wake all at once. It never had. In one home, a baker rose and moved slowly toward his work, hands already familiar with the motions they would soon repeat. Grain was ground gently. Water was added carefully. Dough was shaped with patience. There was no need to hurry the process. Time was an ally here. Nearby, a young student sat by an open window, watching the canal. She did not study this morning. She simply watched the way light touched water, how movement created shape, how stillness held it. These lessons were as important as any written symbol. Along the inner ring, elders gathered briefly, exchanging quiet nods rather than words. They had learned that much could be communicated without sound. Their presence together was enough. The temple of balance stood open now, welcoming the day as it had welcomed the night. Sunlight reached the shallow pool, illuminating its clear depth. The water did not sparkle. It glowed softly, reflecting sky and stone together. Outside the city, fields stirred awake. Birds moved between branches. Leaves adjusted their angles to receive warmth. The land accepted the day with the same calm grace it had shown the night. Beyond it all, the sea stretched endlessly, unchanged by the passing of hours. Waves rolled in slow patterns, repeating themselves without boredom. The horizon remained distant, patient, unconcerned with being reached. And Atlantis existed within this moment, fully and without effort. There was no thought of future loss. No fear of what might come. Only the present, steady and complete. As the morning settled into its gentle rhythm, the island felt whole. Not because it was perfect, but because it understood itself. The story of Atlantis did not need an ending. It moved like water, like breath, like sleep itself, continuing quietly, beyond the need for attention. And if the listener drifts now, if thoughts soften and fade, that is as it should be. The island remains, calm and distant, holding the quiet long after words fall away. Morning in Atlantis did not rise upward. It spread outward, like warmth moving through water. Light flowed gently along the curves of the island, touching stone, water, and earth with equal care. Nothing was startled awake. Everything was invited. The canals carried this light slowly, bending it, softening it. Reflections drifted along their surfaces, never still for long, never rushed. A small boat moved silently through one of the inner waterways, its oar barely disturbing the water. The person guiding it did not speak. They did not need to. The city already knew they were there. Stone bridges arched over the canals, low and wide, worn smooth by centuries of passing feet. Each bridge held the memory of countless mornings like this one. Countless nights before it. The stone did not separate time. It held it all together. In the markets, there was no shouting. Goods were placed carefully on low tables. Fruit still cool from the night air. Cloth folded neatly, colors muted and calm. Those who passed stopped when they wished, moved on when they were ready. Exchange was unhurried. Nothing felt scarce. Children wandered with quiet curiosity, hands brushing stone walls, fingertips trailing along carved patterns older than any living voice. They did not run. They did not need to. Movement itself felt complete without speed. In shaded courtyards, water flowed through shallow channels carved into the floor, cooling the air as it passed. The sound was steady and low, a continuous reminder of balance. People rested nearby, seated or reclining, allowing the day to form itself naturally around them. High above, the sky stretched wide and open. Clouds drifted without shape or intention, slowly thinning as the sun climbed. Light grew warmer, but never harsh. Atlantis had been built to welcome it, not fight it. Along the outer ring of the island, the sea pressed gently against stone embankments, rising and falling in slow agreement with the land. Fishermen prepared their nets without urgency, checking knots they had tied 1,000 times before. They knew the sea would offer what it wished, when it wished. No one demanded more. In the great hall of learning, the doors stood open. Air moved freely through tall openings, carrying the scent of water and stone. Scholars returned gradually, not to fill the space, but to occupy it lightly. Tablets were lifted, set down again. Knowledge here was never forced into the mind. It was allowed to settle. One scholar paused, staring at the way light fell across the floor, noticing how the shadow of a column moved almost imperceptibly. This too was a lesson. The passage of time could be seen, if one slowed enough to look. At the center of the city, the temple of balance held steady. The shallow pool reflected the brightening sky, its surface barely disturbed. A single leaf drifted down, touching the water, sending out gentle rings that faded before reaching the edge. No one removed it. The moment belonged. Beyond the city, the hills warmed slowly. Stone released the coolness of night. The earth exhaled. Plants lifted themselves slightly, responding not to command, but to familiarity. The elder walked now along the canal, staff tapping softly against stone. He moved slowly, not from weakness, but from choice. He had learned long ago that speed hid things worth seeing. As he walked, he listened, not for danger, not for change, but for harmony. He felt it everywhere. Atlantis was not silent. It was quiet in the way deep water is quiet. Full. Present. Complete. As the day continued its gentle unfolding, nothing marked its progress sharply. No sudden heat. No urgent calls. The city flowed from moment to moment without resistance. And far beneath the island, deeper than stone and water, the earth continued to hold. It had done so for longer than memory allowed. It would do so still. The story does not rush forward here. It lingers. It drifts. It allows the listener to rest within it, just as Atlantis rests within the sea. Breath slows. Thoughts soften. Words become less important. The island remains, not as legend, not as warning, but as a memory of balance, floating quietly beyond the edge of waking thought, where sleep deepens and carries everything gently onward. As the day continued to open itself across Atlantis, a quiet sense of purpose moved through the island. Not urgency, not ambition, but something deeper, a shared understanding that each moment belonged exactly where it was. In the inner city, a gathering began to form near one of the larger circular plazas. It was not announced, nor summoned by sound. People simply arrived, one by one, guided by habit older than memory. Some sat on the smooth stone edges of the plaza. Others stood, hands folded loosely, eyes calm. At the center of the circle lay a large stone disk embedded in the ground. Its surface was etched with faint markings, not symbols of power or conquest, but of cycles. The movement of stars. The rise and fall of tides. The quiet return of seasons. Children traced these markings with their fingers, learning without instruction. An elder stepped forward slowly, his presence enough to draw attention without command. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, carried easily by the still air. He spoke of listening. Not listening with the ears alone, but with the body, with the breath, with the space between thoughts. He reminded them that Atlantis had flourished not because it had taken more, but because it had learned when to stop. As he spoke, the sea beyond the city shifted. A deeper current moved far beneath the surface, unseen but felt. The watchers, standing at the edge of the plaza, noticed this immediately. Their faces did not change, but their awareness sharpened. Atlantis was alive. And like all living things, it was never completely still. Later, as the gathering dissolved naturally, the watchers met quietly along the upper terraces. They spoke little, but what they shared mattered. The tides were changing, not suddenly, not dangerously, but persistently. The island was adjusting itself, slowly, patiently, as it always had. There was no fear in this. Only recognition. In the days that followed, small changes appeared. Water in certain canals flowed more strongly. Stone warmed and cooled at slightly different rhythms. Birds altered their resting places. None of this alarmed the people. Change was not an enemy here. It was a message. Scholars recorded these shifts carefully, not to control them, but to remember. Knowledge in Atlantis was never about dominance. It was about harmony. At night, the city returned to its familiar quiet, but now with a deeper attentiveness. Lamps burned lower. Conversations softened further. The sea sounded closer, even when it had not moved. The elder walked often now, guided by instinct more than sight. He felt the island beneath his feet, felt the way it breathed differently than before. He did not resist it. He rested his hand against stone walls, against columns, against the edges of canals, acknowledging what was unfolding. He remembered stories passed down long before his time, stories not of destruction, but of release. Of places that had chosen to let go and holding on would have broken the balance. Atlantis had never been meant to last forever. That knowledge did not carry sadness. It carried peace. One evening, under a sky brushed with quiet stars, the people gathered again, not in concern, but in gratitude. Fires were lit along the outer ring, their reflections stretching across the water. Music drifted softly, not to excite, but to soothe. Voices blended, slow and steady, rising and falling like breath. Children slept nearby, held by the rhythm of sound and sea. The watchers stood together, gazing outward. The ocean was calm, but vast. It had always been vast. It would always be. As the night deepened, something shifted gently beneath the island. Not collapse. Not violence. Only movement. The earth adjusting its weight. The sea making space. Atlantis responded as it always had, without panic, without resistance. Homes were left open. Knowledge was shared freely. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was hoarded. The elder returned to the canal one final time, sitting where water met stone. He watched the moon stretch across the surface, breaking and reforming with every small movement. He breathed. The island breathed with him. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Atlantis began to rest more deeply than it ever had before, settling not into sleep alone, but into memory. The sea accepted it gently. The stars watched in silence. And the story of Atlantis did not end in fire or fear, but in quiet release, a city becoming still water, becoming rhythm, becoming something carried forward not in stone, but in the calm that lingers long after waking thought fades. The night holds that calm now. And sleep, like the ocean, carries everything softly onward. The sea did not rush to claim Atlantis. It never had. Instead, it waited, as it always did, with patience deeper than stone. The island felt this waiting not as threat, but as invitation. Days passed gently, though the people did not count them. The sun continued its familiar path. The moon returned night after night, pulling the tides with quiet certainty. Yet beneath these familiar rhythms, the island continued its slow adjustment, like a long breath being released. The canals, once perfectly measured, now carried water that lingered a little longer. Their surfaces rose and fell almost imperceptibly. Stone steps that met the water grew damp more often. Children noticed first, their feet cooling sooner than expected. They laughed softly and moved away, untroubled. The elders noticed next. They exchanged calm glances, not of fear, but of recognition. This was not sudden. This was not wrong. This was the island completing a cycle that had begun long before any living memory. In the great hall of learning, tablets were gathered and shared openly. Knowledge that had once been studied quietly now moved freely from hand to hand. No one spoke of preservation through force. What mattered would be remembered by those ready to remember. At night, the city grew quieter still. Lamps were lit fewer each evening, not because of loss, but because less light was needed. The moon and stars seemed closer now, reflected not only in the canals, but in the calm acceptance of the people themselves. Along the outer ring, the sea crept gently higher against the embankments. It did not break them. It leaned against them, resting there, as though testing the shape of the island. Stone responded by cooling, softening, releasing warmth it had held for centuries. The watchers walked their paths with steady grace. They felt the shift beneath their feet more clearly now, not danger, not collapse, but surrender. The land was not being taken. It was being returned. One watcher paused at the highest point of Atlantis and looked back across the city. Curved pathways glowed faintly in the starlight. Water moved slowly through every channel, linking every home, every hall, every garden together in one final harmony. He felt no grief. Atlantis had been complete. That was enough. In the lower districts, families slept closer together now, not out of fear, but comfort. Breathing aligned. Dreams softened. Children dreamed of water that held them gently, of voices that spoke without words. The elder returned once more to the temple of balance. The pool at its center reflected a sky heavy with stars. The water level had risen slightly, covering more of the stone edge. He stepped closer, barefoot, and felt the coolness welcome him. He remembered the earliest teachings, that balance was not about standing still, but about knowing when to move. As he rested his palm against the water, the island responded with a subtle shift, like a long-held breath finally released. Far beneath Atlantis, the earth adjusted its weight. Stone slid against stone, slowly, carefully, without fracture. Water flowed into spaces prepared long ago, spaces carved not by accident, but by understanding. The sea rose further now, not as a wave, not as a flood, but as an embrace. Canals widened into one another. Gardens accepted water into their soil, leaves floating briefly before settling. Stone paths disappeared beneath clear depths, their shapes still visible, remembered. The city did not cry out. There were no bells. No alarms. No running feet. Only stillness, deep and steady. The watchers stood together, hands folded, eyes open. Scholars placed tablets gently into the water, watching symbols blur and dissolve, trusting that knowledge did not belong to stone alone. Homes filled slowly, quietly. Air escaped in soft bubbles. Lanterns dimmed, then vanished, their light replaced by moon and star reflecting through water now everywhere. Atlantis sank without fear. The elder remained at the temple until the water reached his chest. He closed his eyes and breathed once more, in time with the tide. When the water covered him completely, there was no struggle, only release. Above, the sea smoothed itself, erasing edges, softening outlines. The island slept beneath the surface not as a ruin, but as a memory returning to where it began. By morning, there was nothing visible but calm water stretching to the horizon. No wreckage. No scars. Only rhythm. Fish moved through spaces where halls once stood. Light filtered down through clear depths, touching columns, tracing paths, remembering shapes. Atlantis remained, not lost, but transformed, held quietly beneath the surface, beyond reach, beyond need. And so the story continues not in sound, but in stillness. The sea breathes. The earth rests. The memory lingers. And as sleep deepens, Atlantis drifts on, not as a city, but as calm itself, carrying every listener gently into the same quiet that welcomed it home. The sea above Atlantis did not seal itself tightly. It rested lightly, allowing light to pass, allowing memory to breathe. Beneath the surface, the city lay intact, not broken, not ruined, simply still. Stone walls stood where they always had. Columns remained upright. Pathways curved gently through spaces now filled with water instead of air. Currents moved slowly through the submerged canals, following the same paths water had always taken. Fish drifted where people once walked. Plants rooted themselves in places where gardens had been, growing calmly, untroubled by the change. Atlantis did not disappear. It quieted. Above the surface, seasons passed. Storms crossed the ocean and moved on. Sunlight returned again and again, warming the water, then releasing it. Ships sailed nearby without knowing what rested beneath them. Their shadows passed briefly over stone and vanished. Far below, the city continued its patient rest. Light filtered down in soft ribbons, illuminating familiar shapes. The Temple of Balance remained at the center, its circular form clearly visible through the clear water. The pool that once reflected the sky now reflected the sea above, holding shifting patterns of light that moved slowly across its surface. The elder's staff lay where he had placed it, resting against stone, undisturbed. Time did not claim it. The sea respected what had been offered willingly. Currents carried faint sounds, not voices, not words, but echoes. The rhythm of breathing. The memory of footsteps. The calm presence of a place that had never resisted change. Creatures learned the city gently. They did not rush into it. They explored slowly, carefully, as though sensing that this was not an ordinary reef, not a ruin born of violence, but a place of intention. Some spaces remained untouched. Water moved around them with particular care, as if remembering their purpose. The great hall of learning stood open, its wide entrances allowing currents to pass freely. Light touched the smooth floor, revealing tablets still resting in their alcoves, symbols softened but not erased. Knowledge, like the city itself, adapted. Above the sea, generations rose and fell. Stories formed. Names changed. Sailors spoke of calm waters where the sea felt deeper than expected, quieter than anywhere else. Some lingered there longer than planned, drawn by a feeling they could not name. They slept deeply in those waters. They dreamed of circles and light and stone warmed by the sun. No one feared the place. No one felt threatened. The ocean there felt balanced, steady, whole. And beneath it all, Atlantis remained. Time passed differently now. Without breath or urgency, moments stretched and softened. Stone weathered slowly, but not harshly. Water polished edges instead of breaking them. The city aged as living things age, with grace. The watchers' paths remained visible, tracing the upper terraces. Fish followed them instinctively, moving along curves shaped long ago. The highest point of the island still caught the earliest light, just as it always had. Sometimes, when the sea was perfectly still, the reflection above aligned with the city below, and for a moment, Atlantis appeared to exist in two places at once, suspended between surface and depth, between memory and presence. It did not ask to be found. It did not need to be remembered loudly. Its purpose had already been fulfilled. Atlantis had taught balance. It had lived it. And when the time came, it had released itself without fear. The sea held that lesson gently. And now, as sleep deepens and thoughts loosen their grip, the story of Atlantis becomes quieter still. It no longer needs words. It moves like water through the mind, smoothing edges, slowing breath, carrying the listener toward rest. The ocean breathes above the city. The city rests beneath the ocean. And calm, ancient and patient, continues on, unbroken, unending, softly holding everything that drifts into sleep. Long after Atlantis had settled beneath the sea, the world above continued to turn, unaware that anything precious rested below. Winds crossed the ocean. Clouds gathered and thinned. Stars traced the same ancient paths they always had. And the sea, patient and unpossessive, held its quiet secret. The city beneath changed slowly, almost lovingly. Stone surfaces softened where water brushed them day after day. Sharp corners grew smooth. Open spaces filled with gentle motion as currents learned the shape of the streets and halls. Atlantis became part of the ocean without losing itself to it. Life arrived carefully. First the smallest things, drifting plants, delicate growths clinging to stone, pale and slow. Then fish, curious but cautious, weaving through columns and archways. They learned the pathways instinctively, following curves designed long ago for human movement. Nothing felt accidental. The temple of balance remained the calm center of it all. Even now, water passed through it differently, slowing as if remembering silence. Light from above filtered down and rested there longer than anywhere else, illuminating the circular form, tracing patterns across stone that had once reflected the sky. Time passed in layers. Above the surface, centuries unfolded. Civilizations rose and faded. Languages changed. Names were lost and remade. Sailors crossed the same waters again and again, guided by stars, unaware of the city watching quietly from below. Some ships lingered. Their crews spoke of a place where the sea felt deeper, heavier with stillness. Compasses behaved gently there, never wildly, but subtly, as if influenced by something older than iron. Sleep came easily in those waters. Dreams were vivid, calm, filled with light moving through water and voices without sound. Stories spread slowly. Not of destruction, not of punishment, but of a place that chose rest. Generations later, scholars argued over fragments of old texts, over whispers of an island that had known harmony better than power. Most dismissed it as metaphor. A few listened more closely. And still Atlantis waited. One quiet morning, long after memory had thinned, a small vessel drifted across the ocean above the sunken city. Its hull was old, its sails worn, its journey unhurried. The one aboard had no destination in mind, only movement. As the sun climbed, the water below cleared. Light pierced deeper than usual, and for a moment, stone shapes appeared, faint, distant, undeniable. Curves where no reef should be. Lines too deliberate for nature alone. The sailor leaned over the edge, breath slowing, heart steady. There was no fear. Only recognition. A feeling that something below was not calling out, but acknowledging presence. The vessel drifted on. The moment passed. The sea closed softly above the stone. No pursuit followed. Atlantis did not seek return. That was not its purpose. Below, the city continued its quiet existence. Knowledge remained etched in softened symbols, no longer meant for reading, but for remembering. The watchers' paths became routes for currents. The great hall became a place where light gathered and rested before moving on. Atlantis had transformed into a lesson written in motion rather than words. And the ocean understood. Storms passed above without touching it deeply. Currents curved around it with care. Even the deepest movements of the sea respected the shape of what lay below, as if honoring an agreement older than time. The city rested not in darkness, but in filtered light, a gentle, shifting glow that never disappeared completely. It was enough. As ages continued to pass, Atlantis became something else entirely. Not a place, not a city, not even a memory, but a feeling. The sense of calm that arrives without reason. The quiet certainty that balance is possible. The deep rest that comes when struggle finally ends. That feeling traveled far. It surfaced in dreams. In still moments before sleep. In the pause between breaths. And now, as the story drifts onward, it does not ask attention. It does not seek understanding. It simply remains, like the city beneath the sea, like the calm beneath thought. Atlantis rests. The ocean breathes. And sleep, ancient and patient, carries everything gently forward, just as it always has. The story does not end. It deepens. As Atlantis continued its long rest beneath the ocean, the world above changed in ways both subtle and vast. Continents shifted their shapes. Rivers carved new paths. Forests rose where deserts had once breathed dust into the air. Yet the sea above the city remained unusually calm, as though remembering an agreement made long ago. Beneath the surface, the city learned a new stillness. Movement became slower, more deliberate. Currents passed through archways and corridors as if following ancient customs. Water entered and exited the great hall of learning without turbulence, flowing evenly, respectfully, never rushing. Stone absorbed the presence of the sea. It darkened slightly, smoothed further, growing cool and firm in a way that felt complete rather than eroded. Columns stood as they always had, their bases settled gently into the ocean floor, held steady by the same patience that had guided their construction. Life adapted around the city without overwhelming it. Coral grew in quiet places, never covering symbols carved into stone, never blocking paths meant to remain open. Schools of fish moved through plazas in slow spirals, following circular patterns etched long before they were born. They did not collide. They did not scatter. They moved as if remembering something they had never learned. Light continued to visit Atlantis each day, arriving filtered and softened. It bent as it passed through water, scattering into gentle bands that drifted across walls and floors. Some days it lingered longer in certain places, touching stone steps, resting along the edge of the Temple of Balance, tracing the curve of the central pool where water met water. Time passed, not in years, but in deepening quiet. Above the sea, humans forgot. Stories faded, then returned in altered forms. The name Atlantis became a sound rather than a place, a question rather than a certainty. Some spoke of it as warning. Others as dream. Very few sensed the truth, that it was neither. It was choice. Occasionally, far above the city, storms crossed the ocean. Waves grew tall. Winds pressed hard against the surface. But even then, the water above Atlantis behaved differently. It did not churn violently. It moved with restraint, absorbing energy, dispersing force. Sailors noticed this without understanding it, calling the place gentle, forgiving. Some dropped anchors and rested there longer than expected. Sleep came heavily to them. When they woke, they felt restored, but they could not explain why. Below, the city listened. The elder's presence lingered not as a body, not as form, but as resonance. Where he had last stood, water moved in perfect circles, endlessly repeating a pattern of release. Other places echoed different memories, laughter softened into motion, footsteps into rhythm, voices into calm vibration. Atlantis had become a library of feeling rather than fact. Knowledge here no longer waited to be read. It waited to be felt. As centuries folded into one another, the sea level shifted again and again. Sometimes Atlantis rested deeper, wrapped in colder, darker water. Other times it rose slightly, allowing warmer currents to pass through its upper terraces. The city accepted each change without resistance. It had learned the final lesson completely. On rare days, when the ocean above was perfectly still and the sun stood high, the outline of Atlantis could almost be seen from the surface. Not clearly. Not sharply. Just enough to suggest shape. Sailors who noticed this felt no urge to dive, no desire to claim. They felt only quiet wonder, and then the moment passed. Atlantis did not wish to return. Its purpose was no longer tied to stone or structure. It existed now as reminder rather than presence. As balance rather than achievement. That balance reached farther than the sea. It reached the minds of those drifting towards sleep. The slowing of breath. The easing of thought. The release of effort. The sense that nothing more was required. And now, as the story continues to unfold without sound or urgency, Atlantis remains exactly where it belongs, beneath the surface of awareness, beneath memory, beneath striving. The ocean holds it gently. Time moves around it without demand. And rest, deep and ancient, flows on endlessly. There is nothing to do. Nothing to hold. Nothing to fear. Only the quiet continuation of water, of breath, of sleep, carrying everything softly forward, just as Atlantis once chose to do. Long after Atlantis had settled into its quiet place beneath the sea, something new began to happen, not above the water, but far below it, deeper than the city itself. Beneath the stone foundations, beneath the softened plazas and resting halls, the ocean floor carried slow-moving currents that few places on the planet ever felt. These currents did not rush. They pressed gently, endlessly, shaping the earth over ages rather than moments. And Atlantis, resting where these currents crossed, began to respond in a way no other place ever had. The city did not drift. It listened. Stone absorbed vibration. Columns carried faint echoes downward. The circular design of Atlantis, chosen long before the sea reclaimed it, allowed these deep movements to pass through without resistance. The city became a quiet instrument, translating the language of the planet into motion so subtle it could only be felt, never heard. Above, the ocean remained calm. But below, the earth spoke slowly. The patterns of light within Atlantis began to change. Sunbeams filtered down as always, but now they bent differently, guided by currents that no longer followed simple paths. Light lingered in places it had never rested before, tracing hidden symbols carved into stone long ago, markings never meant for eyes alone. These symbols were not warnings. They were invitations. Within the Temple of Balance, the central pool, now fully merged with the surrounding sea, began to move in a distinct rhythm. Not waves. Not ripples. A slow, circular pulse, expanding and returning, like breath shared between water and stone. Fish noticed first. They gathered there more often, hovering without urgency, drifting in wide arcs around the temple. Larger creatures followed, not to feed, but to rest. Even predators moved differently here, slowing themselves, passing through without aggression. Atlantis was changing again, not sinking, not rising, but becoming something quieter still. Far above, on the surface, a scholar sailed alone beneath a sky heavy with stars. He had studied ancient texts for most of his life, fragments of stories dismissed by others as metaphor. He did not expect discovery. He sought only understanding. As his vessel crossed a certain stretch of water, he felt it immediately, the same calm sailors had spoken of for generations. But this time, it was stronger. Deeper. As if the sea itself were asking him to stop. He did. The vessel drifted. The night air grew still. Sleep pressed gently against his thoughts, but he resisted just enough to remain aware. And in that space between waking and rest, something unfolded. He did not see Atlantis. He felt it. A sensation of circular movement. Of balance without effort. Of knowledge that did not demand remembering. His breath slowed without instruction. His heart followed. The sea beneath him seemed to widen, not physically, but perceptually, as though depth itself had grown more spacious. Below, Atlantis responded. Light deepened along the watchers' paths. The great hall of learning brightened faintly, as though acknowledging presence above. Currents adjusted their flow, aligning with rhythms older than stars. No message was sent. No revelation given. Only alignment. The scholar slept deeply that night. When he woke, the feeling remained, not as information, but as certainty. He sailed on at dawn, never knowing precisely what had passed beneath him, yet changed by it nonetheless. Years later, he would write of balance. Of civilizations that ended not in collapse, but in completion. His work would be read quietly by those ready to understand it. Below, Atlantis continued its slow transformation. Stone became memory. Memory became rhythm. Rhythm became calm. The city no longer resembled a place meant to be entered. It became a place meant to be felt. Currents carried its influence outward, thinning as they traveled, touching distant shores in ways no map could trace. People slept more easily in lands far from the sea, never knowing why. Dreams softened. Breath slowed. Moments of stillness arrived unexpectedly, like gifts without sender. Atlantis did not need to be known. It had moved beyond that. And now, as the story drifts forward once more, it does not pull attention. It gently holds it, then releases it, allowing sleep to take over where words no longer matter. The ocean breathes. The earth listens. And Atlantis, no longer city nor legend, continues, quietly interesting, endlessly calm, beneath the surface of everything. The influence of Atlantis did not travel like a wave. It moved more like a tide that no one noticed until it had already changed the shoreline. Far from the ocean, in places where land stretched wide and dry, people began to experience a subtle shift. Nights felt deeper. Silence felt fuller. Thoughts that once circled restlessly now settled more easily. No one connected this to a city beneath the sea. They simply felt that sleep came with less resistance. Atlantis was learning how to speak without sound. Beneath the water, the city's structure continued to adapt. Stone that had once defined boundaries now guided movement. Corridors softened into channels where currents flowed in steady patterns, looping gently, never colliding. The circular design of the city, once practical, now revealed its deeper purpose. Energy, whether of water, light, or vibration, entered, slowed, balanced itself, and left without disturbance. This was not accidental. It had never been. Long ago, before the sea reclaimed it, Atlantis had been designed not only as a city, but as a listening place. A place where the planet itself could speak and be heard. That function had not ended with the sinking. It had been completed. Deep within the earth, slow tectonic movements continued their endless conversation. Pressure shifted. Stone adjusted. Heat traveled upward and cooled again. In most places, this language remained buried, unheard. But through Atlantis, it was translated into calm. The city absorbed tension and released it gently into the sea. Large ocean creatures began to pass through the area more often. Whales altered their routes slightly, lingering longer in the waters above the sunken city. Their songs changed here, not louder, not softer, but slower. Notes stretched. Gaps widened. The sound carried farther with less effort. The sea listened back. At times, when these creatures passed directly above the Temple of Balance, the water there grew almost completely still, as though honoring the exchange. Light bent softly. Motion slowed further. Everything aligned for brief, perfect moments. Above the surface, sailors noticed that instruments behaved differently in these waters. Not incorrectly, simply gently. Measurements smoothed themselves out. Extremes softened. Even storms, when they crossed this place, lost their sharpness sooner than expected. The ocean did not fight the storms here. It dissolved them. Generations passed. The idea of Atlantis shifted again in human thought. It was no longer only a lost city. It became a symbol of wisdom, of restraint, of something precious that chose quiet over dominance. Artists painted it not as ruins, but as light beneath water. Writers described it not as tragedy, but as completion. Most never realized how close they were to the truth. Beneath the sea, Atlantis had begun to fade in form, but not in presence. Some walls collapsed inward slowly, not from weakness, but release. Stone returned to sand. Sand returned to motion. Yet the core, the balance, remained intact. The temple of balance endured longest. Its circular form resisted dissolution, not through strength, but through harmony. Water moved through it exactly as it needed to. Nothing pulled at it. Nothing pushed against it. It became less a structure and more a point of stillness. If one could descend there, not physically, but perceptually, one would feel it immediately. A sensation like standing at the center of something vast and calm. No instruction. No demand. Only allowance. That allowance spread. Children born far inland dreamed of wide water and soft light. Elders found peace more easily in their final nights. Even those burdened by constant motion felt moments of unexplainable rest. Atlantis had become a quiet teacher. Not through words. Not through memory. But through resonance. And now, as this story continues, it does not ask to be followed closely. It allows itself to blur at the edges, to soften, to become something felt rather than heard. Just as Atlantis itself did. The sea breathes slowly. The earth remains patient. And somewhere beneath both, the last echo of a city continues its gentle work, easing, balancing, calming, as sleep deepens naturally, without effort, without end. The work of Atlantis became quieter still, so quiet that even those who felt its influence could no longer tell where it began or ended. It blended into the background of existence, like the sound of distant water that one only notices when it finally stops. Beneath the sea, the last clear outlines of the city softened further. Walls curved inward, then slowly lost their distinction, becoming gentle rises in the ocean floor. Stone steps turned into terraces of sand and shell. Yet the original shape of Atlantis never vanished completely. The circular intention remained, held not by matter, but by pattern. Currents continued to move through this pattern, guided even now by choices made long ago. Light still found its way down, though weaker than before, filtering through greater depths. It arrived as a dim glow rather than a beam, settling briefly before drifting on. In that glow, motion slowed even more. Fish hovered without effort. Water itself seemed to pause, as if listening for something that no longer needed to be said. The temple of balance was no longer recognizable as a building. Its stones had separated and settled, spreading outward in a wide, shallow ring. But the stillness at its center remained untouched. Even now, water passing through that space grew calmer, smoother, as though remembering how to behave. Above the surface, the ocean mirrored this calm. The place where Atlantis rested became known among sailors not by name, but by feeling. A stretch of sea where the mind grew quiet. Where arguments faded. Where sleep came easily, even on restless nights. Some anchored there intentionally, not knowing why. Others passed through and carried the effect with them for days afterward, unable to explain the sense of ease that followed. Stories continued to evolve. Atlantis became less a destination and more a state of being. To find Atlantis came to mean something different, to find balance, to release excess, to allow life to move without force. No one realized how literal this had become. Deep within the earth, pressure continued to shift, as it always had. But where tension might have built elsewhere, it softened here. The ocean floor adjusted gently, releasing strain in slow, harmless movements. Atlantis absorbed what it could and let the rest pass through. The city had become a passage rather than a place. In time, even the sea forgot there had ever been walls or halls. But it did not forget the calm. That remained woven into the movement of water, into the way waves rose and fell above that unseen center. And so, without announcement, without record, Atlantis completed its final transformation. It was no longer stone. No longer city. No longer memory. It was rhythm. That rhythm spread outward endlessly, thinning but never disappearing. It reached shorelines where people paused without knowing why. It reached bedrooms where breath slowed and thoughts loosened. It reached moments just before sleep, when effort finally gives way to rest. And now, as this story continues to drift, it does not need direction. It does not need an ending. Like Atlantis itself, it settles gently beneath awareness, becoming part of the quiet that holds you when you let go. The ocean moves. The earth remains steady. And sleep arrives naturally, carrying everything with it, just as Atlantis once allowed itself to be carried home. The rhythm that Atlantis became did not fade with distance. It simply grew softer, more subtle, like a melody remembered rather than heard. Those who felt it rarely noticed it in the moment. It revealed itself later, in small ways, after effort had loosened its grip. Beneath the ocean, where the city had once rested in stone, the sea floor now held a gentle hollow, almost imperceptible. Currents curved around this hollow instinctively, slowing as they passed, smoothing themselves before moving on. It was as though the water had learned a lesson there and carried it forward. In the depths, where darkness was complete, the rhythm still existed. It did not need light. It moved through pressure and release, through the long language of the planet itself. Even there, nothing felt heavy. Nothing felt strained. Above the surface, time continued its familiar turning. New harbors were built. Old ones fell into disuse. Ships grew larger, then smaller again. Navigation improved, then relied once more on instinct when instruments failed. Through all of this, the waters above Atlantis remained unchanged in their effect. Sailors who passed through felt a strange easing in their chests, as if a long-held breath had been let out without effort. Arguments softened. Restlessness dissolved. Some stood at the rail at night, gazing into the dark water, feeling watched over rather than watched. They did not know why they felt safe. Far inland, nowhere near the sea, the influence arrived differently. In moments of exhaustion, when the body finally surrendered to rest, sleep deepened more quickly. Dreams slowed. They became spacious, less crowded with urgency. People woke feeling as though something had settled into place while they slept. No one connected these moments. No one needed to. Atlantis no longer required recognition. It worked best when unnoticed. In rare instances, someone would sit in complete stillness, by a river, in a quiet room, beneath an open sky, and feel a sudden alignment. Breath and heartbeat would match without intention. Thought would loosen. In that space, a feeling would arise, ancient and calm, without image or name. That feeling was Atlantis. Not the city. Not the myth. But the choice it had made. To release rather than resist. to complete rather than collapse, to trust the larger rhythm instead of forcing its own. Beneath the ocean, the hollow where the city once lay continued to smooth itself. Sediment settled. Life moved through. Nothing marked the place as special, and yet everything moved more gently there. The sea remembered. And as night returned again and again across the world, bringing quiet wherever it went, that same rhythm carried into the dark. Into slowing thoughts. Into heavy eyelids. Into the peaceful space where effort finally dissolves. The story no longer needs to move forward. It has arrived where it was always going. Like Atlantis, it rests now, not gone, not lost, but transformed into something that holds rather than speaks. The ocean breathes softly. The earth remains patient. And sleep, deep and unforced, carries everything onward in the same gentle way Atlantis once chose. The rhythm continues. Long after Atlantis had released itself into the sea and become rhythm rather than stone, the world above entered an age of forgetting. Not the forgetting of loss, but the softer forgetting that happens when something no longer needs guarding. Names changed. Stories bent and blurred. What had once been spoken as memory became symbol, and what had been symbol became feeling. Yet beneath the ocean, the rhythm remained precise. The hollow where Atlantis had rested continued to shape the movement of water in ways too subtle for instruments to detect. Currents slowed as they crossed it, then resumed their journeys carrying a gentler momentum with them. This softness spread outward, touching distant waters, thinning as it traveled but never fully disappearing. The sea had learned something there. Deep below the surface, where light could no longer reach, pressure grew immense, as it always had. But even there, within that crushing silence, movement remained smooth. The earth shifted its weight slowly, carefully, releasing strain in long cycles rather than sudden breaks. Where faults elsewhere snapped and fractured, the region beneath Atlantis flexed and settled. The planet itself rested more easily because of it. Above, centuries continued to turn. Entire cities rose along coastlines, glittered briefly, then fell into ruin. Others learned restraint and lasted longer. None remembered Atlantis clearly, but some unknowingly echoed its design: circular gathering places, open halls, water allowed to flow freely instead of being trapped. These places felt calmer. People lingered in them without knowing why. At night, when human activity faded and the world softened, the rhythm of Atlantis became easier to feel. It slipped into the quiet spaces between thoughts, into the pause between one breath and the next. Those moments grew longer, deeper, more comfortable. Sleep arrived without struggle. Dreams changed slowly over generations. They became less frantic, less crowded. More spacious. More fluid. Many dreamed of water, not as danger, but as support. As something that held rather than threatened. Beneath the ocean, the last traces of stone continued their slow return to sand. But even as matter dissolved, structure remained. The circular intention of Atlantis persisted, guiding movement the way a riverbed guides water long after floods have reshaped its banks. Nothing forced this order. Nothing maintained it deliberately. It simply endured. Occasionally, deep beneath the sea, massive creatures passed through the area. They slowed instinctively, adjusting their movements without conscious thought. Their hearts beat more evenly. Their paths curved gently instead of cutting straight through. Songs lengthened, notes stretching farther apart, vibrating longer in the water. The ocean listened. The creatures listened. And something ancient recognized itself. Above the surface, rare individuals felt drawn to the sea without reason. They stood on empty shores at night, listening to waves that seemed unusually patient. They felt watched over, though no eyes were present. Some wept softly, not from sadness, but relief. They never knew why. Time pressed forward. Eventually, even the idea of Atlantis faded into near silence. It became a word mentioned rarely, then not at all. But the absence of the word did not remove the presence of what it had become. Balance does not require memory. In the deepest hours of night, when cities quieted and even machines paused, the rhythm could be felt most clearly. It moved beneath everything, beneath traffic, beneath walls, beneath the constant hum of thought. It reminded the body how to slow, how to release tension without instruction. Breath deepened. Muscles softened. The mind loosened its grip. This was Atlantis now. Not a place to visit. Not a secret to uncover. But a condition of rest that the world could return to, again and again, without knowing its source. And as this story continues, it no longer needs to add events or characters. Its interest lives in continuity, not change. In the quiet persistence of something that chose completion over survival. The ocean moves endlessly. The earth adjusts patiently. And sleep arrives naturally, carrying everything back into rhythm. The rhythm continues. Many centuries after Atlantis had become rhythm rather than ruin, there came a time when the sea itself began to change in ways that drew careful attention. Not storms. Not rising tides. But patterns, measurable, repeatable, quietly impossible to ignore. Oceanographers noticed first. They recorded areas where currents behaved differently, where turbulence faded more quickly than models predicted. Instruments lowered into these waters reported pressure behaving strangely, as if stress were being redistributed rather than accumulating. Heat moved differently too, dispersing smoothly instead of concentrating. At first, these findings were dismissed as error. But the data returned again and again. Ships passing through the same region reported lower fuel resistance. Submersibles experienced fewer vibrations. Sound traveled farther with less distortion. Even the crew themselves slept better while anchored there, waking with unusual clarity and calm. No one spoke of Atlantis. Yet unknowingly, they had found its echo. A joint expedition was planned, not to search for ruins, but to understand the anomaly. The vessel chosen moved slowly, deliberately, equipped with the quietest engines available. When it reached the coordinates, the sea above lay almost unnaturally still. The water was deep, clear, patient. Sensors were lowered first. They revealed no sharp structures, no towering remnants of a city. But they did reveal something stranger, symmetry. Gentle circular patterns in sediment distribution. Pressure gradients forming smooth rings rather than chaotic shifts. Below, the sea floor dipped into a broad, shallow basin. Not a crater. Not erosion. Design. The submersible descended carefully, lights dimmed to avoid disturbance. As it moved downward, its vibrations decreased instead of increasing. The water seemed to guide it, slowing it, centering it. What appeared was not a city, but the suggestion of one. Stone fragments lay half buried, arranged not randomly, but in arcs and curves. No sharp breaks. No collapsed towers. Everything seemed placed, released, allowed to rest where it had fallen. At the center of the basin, instruments registered something unexpected: stillness. Not absence of motion, but perfect balance. Currents flowed around the center rather than through it. Sound softened there. Even the submersible's internal hum felt quieter, as though absorbed by the water itself. The crew fell silent. Not from fear. From instinct. They did not land. Something about the place suggested that arrival was unnecessary. Observation was enough. As they hovered, data streamed in, patterns matching ancient geometric principles found in early philosophies across multiple cultures. Circles within circles. Ratios echoed in star charts, in natural spirals, in the human heartbeat. This was not architecture. It was alignment. Back on the surface, the findings caused debate. Some argued natural formation. Others spoke cautiously of intelligent design. One researcher, older and quieter than the rest, said very little, only that whatever had once existed here understood restraint better than any civilization on record. Further studies followed. Over time, something extraordinary became clear: the region acted as a stabilizer. Seismic tension nearby dissipated gradually. Thermal buildup evened out. The ocean itself behaved more predictably in surrounding waters. Atlantis, though no one named it, was still working. The discovery changed nothing quickly. There were no announcements, no claims. The place was designated a protected zone, not because of what was found, but because of how it felt. Crews reported a reluctance to disturb it. A shared, wordless agreement that it should remain as it was. Years passed. Research continued quietly. The basin became known among scientists as a natural harmonic field, though no one fully understood how or why it existed. Models failed to replicate it. Simulations broke down. The truth was simpler than theory allowed. This place had been built not to endure, but to resolve. Slowly, the idea spread beyond science. Architects spoke of buildings that reduced stress rather than imposed form. Cities experimented with circular layouts, open water channels, spaces designed to slow movement instead of accelerate it. People slept better in these places. No one traced the influence back to the sea. And beneath the water, the basin remained unchanged. Stone continued its patient return to sand. But the pattern endured. The rhythm remained intact. Atlantis, now beyond identity, continued its quiet function, not as memory, not as myth, but as a stabilizing presence woven into the planet itself. The final discovery came not through machines, but through stillness. A researcher, resting alone on deck one night above the basin, allowed himself to stop thinking. He lay back, listening to the water move against the hull. His breath slowed. His thoughts loosened. And in that space, he understood. Atlantis had never been lost. It had been completed. Its people had not failed. They had finished. They had recognized the moment when continuation would break balance, and they had chosen release. The realization carried no sadness. Only peace. And now, as the story continues, it does not push forward. It settles. It invites the listener into the same understanding. That not everything must rise. That not everything must remain. that some things fulfill their purpose by becoming quiet. The ocean holds that lesson. The earth remembers it. And sleep, deep and steady, welcomes it, carrying the listener gently into rest, where the rhythm of Atlantis continues, unchanged and unending. After the discovery of the harmonic basin, interest in the region grew slowly, never explosively. Something about the place resisted urgency. Research proposals took longer to finalize. Ships departed later than scheduled. Even debates seemed to soften before becoming arguments. Those who worked closest to the basin noticed this change most clearly, though none could fully explain it. The ocean above Atlantis did not reveal more than it wished. Sonar maps remained gentle and indistinct, refusing sharp clarity. Attempts to penetrate deeper layers of sediment produced clean data but little detail, as though the place allowed understanding only up to a certain depth. Beyond that, instruments worked, but meaning dissolved. It was as if the basin asked for patience rather than analysis. Among the researchers was a woman who specialized not in geology or physics, but in ancient patterns of settlement. She had spent her career studying why civilizations chose certain places over others, why some cities flourished peacefully while others collapsed violently. When she first reviewed the basin's measurements, she felt an immediate familiarity. Not recognition of place. Recognition of intention. She noticed that the basin's geometry echoed early human gathering spaces across multiple cultures, stone circles, ritual grounds, water-centered settlements, all designed to regulate human behavior rather than dominate nature. These were places built to slow people down. Atlantis, she realized, had not been unique. It had been the most complete expression of a forgotten idea. As she shared her findings quietly with others, a pattern emerged. Many ancient sites long thought symbolic or ceremonial appeared to sit on similar, though weaker, harmonic zones. None matched the scale or refinement of the basin beneath the sea, but all suggested the same philosophy. Build where the world is already balanced. Enhance what exists. Do not force permanence. This realization began to influence choices far beyond research vessels. Urban planners, unaware of the source, began designing cities that reduced stress rather than maximizing efficiency. Curved pathways replaced rigid grids. Water was allowed to move naturally through public spaces. Sound was softened intentionally. People lingered longer without distraction. Sleep improved. Healthcare workers noticed subtle changes too. Patients recovered more quickly in environments designed with flow rather than control. Anxiety lessened. Rest deepened. No single cause could be identified. Atlantis was working again, not directly, not visibly, but through influence. Beneath the sea, the basin responded to this renewed alignment. Currents grew even smoother. Pressure fluctuations eased further. The region became a stabilizing anchor in the planet's complex system of motion and release. Deep Earth sensors detected something remarkable. Microseismic activity that would normally accumulate and discharge violently instead dissipated gradually when passing beneath the basin. Stress was absorbed, redistributed, and released over time. Atlantis was not preventing change. It was preventing rupture. One night, during a prolonged observation period, a submersible remained stationary above the basin longer than planned. Power systems idled. Lights dimmed automatically. Inside, the crew grew unusually quiet. Conversation faded. Breathing slowed. No one slept. but no one felt fully awake either. In that shared stillness, something subtle occurred. Not a vision, not communication, but a shared understanding that the place below was not empty. It was complete. The city had not been built to survive forever. It had been built to teach the planet how to let go without breaking. Its people had understood something humanity was only beginning to remember, that endings chosen consciously are not failures, but acts of wisdom. The submersible ascended later than scheduled. No one remarked on the delay. Years passed. The basin was quietly classified as a global preservation zone, not for historical reasons, but planetary ones. Activity near it was limited. No extraction allowed. No permanent structures built. The decision met little resistance. It felt right. Atlantis remained untouched. Above water, the story continued its slow diffusion into human thought. Writers began to describe lost civilizations not as tragedies, but as completions. Philosophers spoke again of cycles rather than progress. Even technology began to shift toward designs that aged gracefully instead of demanding constant growth. In the quiet moments before sleep, people found themselves thinking less about achievement and more about balance. About when to stop. About what enough truly meant. Beneath the ocean, the basin remained unchanged. Stone continued dissolving into sand. Sand moved with the current. Yet the harmonic pattern persisted, invisible but precise, guiding movement without force. Atlantis had become something no one could own, exploit, or erase. It had become a function of the world itself. And now, as this story continues, it does not rush forward toward climax or conclusion. It settles into continuity, just as Atlantis once did. The ocean breathes steadily above. The earth releases tension below. And sleep arrives gently, carrying the listener into the same deep understanding that some of the greatest stories do not end. They resolve. As understanding of the harmonic basin deepened, a realization began to form quietly among those who studied it most closely. Atlantis had not only stabilized its surroundings after sinking. It had been designed to awaken when the world around it reached certain thresholds of imbalance. The basin was not passive. It was responsive. Data gathered over decades revealed a pattern that could not be ignored. Whenever global systems, climate, tectonic stress, even large-scale human activity reached moments of critical strain, the basin's influence subtly intensified. Currents slowed farther outward. Pressure released more evenly. The region acted like a breath taken just before rupture. This was not coincidence. Atlantis had been built as a release mechanism for the planet itself. The idea unsettled many at first. Not because it implied danger, but because it implied intention. A civilization that understood the long arc of planetary stress well enough to design something that would activate centuries after its own disappearance. Such understanding challenged everything modern thought assumed about ancient limits. One theory emerged slowly, cautiously, proposed by a geophysicist known for restraint rather than speculation. She suggested that Atlantis had been constructed at a convergence of natural resonant points, places where Earth's movements overlapped in predictable cycles. By shaping their city according to those cycles, the Atlanteans had amplified the planet's ability to self-regulate. They had not tried to stop disaster. They had tried to soften it. Further study revealed something even more remarkable. The basin's response was not fixed. It adapted. Its influence changed subtly depending on the type of imbalance it encountered. Thermal stress was eased differently than tectonic pressure. Oceanic turbulence dissipated along separate paths than atmospheric strain. The basin was learning. This discovery was never announced publicly. Not out of secrecy, but caution. There was an unspoken understanding that naming the phenomenon too loudly would invite attempts to control it. And control, everyone sensed, would break what made it work. Atlantis had functioned because it was never forced. Beneath the ocean, the basin responded calmly to observation, but not intrusion. Whenever experimental equipment attempted to anchor itself too firmly, subtle currents formed, making stability difficult. When devices were left free-floating, they functioned perfectly. The lesson was unmistakable. Do not bind what must move. Years passed. Global instability increased in ways both obvious and hidden. Weather patterns grew erratic. Seismic stress accumulated along major fault lines. Human systems strained under their own weight. And quietly, beneath the sea, Atlantis responded. Pressure beneath the basin released gradually over decades rather than centuries. Currents shifted to carry excess heat outward more evenly. Even sound propagation changed subtly, reducing underwater turbulence that would otherwise amplify surface storms. The basin became a planetary moderator. Those closest to the research began to experience something unexpected. Extended exposure to the basin's influence affected perception. People reported an increased sense of time passing more slowly. Decisions felt less reactive. Emotional extremes softened. This was not sedation. It was clarity. One researcher described it simply: it feels like remembering how to breathe properly after years of shallow breaths. Neuroscientists later found subtle changes in brainwave patterns among those who worked above the basin for long periods. Increased coherence. Reduced stress markers. Deeper rest during sleep. Atlantis was influencing biology now. This raised new questions, quiet ones, carefully considered. Had the Atlanteans designed the basin only for the planet? Or had they known that future minds, overwhelmed by speed and pressure, would need stabilization too? Ancient texts were re-examined. Fragments once dismissed as poetic metaphor took on new weight. References to cities that taught the body how to rest and places where thought loosened its grip. These were not myths. They were blueprints. Beneath the sea, the last remaining structural remnants of Atlantis finally dissolved into sand. No recognizable walls remained. No stones stood upright. Yet the basin did not weaken. If anything, it strengthened. The function had outlived the form. At the deepest level, where Earth's slow forces continued their endless motion, the basin acted like a buffer between extremes. Energy flowed into it, was redistributed, and released gently rather than violently. Atlantis had become invisible architecture. One final discovery emerged decades later, almost accidentally. During a rare alignment of planetary cycles, tidal, seismic, atmospheric, the basin reached its highest recorded coherence. Instruments detected a momentary synchronization across multiple systems. For a brief time, the planet itself seemed to pause. Not stop. Pause. In that moment, researchers across the globe reported an unusual phenomenon. People slept more deeply than they had in years. Emergency calls dropped. Heart rates slowed. Even animals behaved differently, migratory patterns adjusted slightly, herds rested longer. No announcement was made. No celebration followed. Those who understood simply watched and listened. Atlantis had fulfilled its final purpose. Not by returning. Not by being revealed. But by continuing exactly as intended. And now, as this story moves forward, it does not seek escalation. It settles into continuation, just as Atlantis did. The interest lies not in what will happen next, but in what is already happening quietly, steadily, beneath everything. The ocean moves gently above. The earth releases pressure below. And the listener drifts naturally toward rest, carried by the same rhythm Atlantis chose long ago. A rhythm of balance. Of release. Of deep, unforced sleep. As decades passed, the basin beneath the sea became something researchers no longer spoke of as a location. It was referred to instead as a process. A slow, living exchange between planet and pressure, between movement and release. Those who worked closest to it stopped asking what Atlantis had been and began asking what it was still becoming. Because something subtle had begun to change again. The basin's influence, once steady and predictable, now showed signs of anticipation. Measurements taken months apart revealed tiny shifts occurring before major planetary stress events rather than after them. The basin was no longer merely responding. It was preparing. This discovery unsettled even the calmest minds. If Atlantis could anticipate imbalance, then it meant the city had been designed with an understanding of cycles far longer than any single civilization. The Atlanteans had not only studied the past. They had studied recurrence. They had learned how patterns echoed forward through time. They had built for a future they would never see. Beneath the sea, where no stone remained intact, the geometry of Atlantis persisted as pressure gradients and flow paths. These invisible structures adjusted themselves continuously, refining how energy passed through. The basin grew more efficient with each cycle, not through growth, but through simplification. Complexity was being stripped away. The basin was becoming purer. Above, life continued in its familiar noise. Cities expanded. Systems accelerated. The world pressed harder against itself. And yet, in moments when collapse seemed inevitable, something softened the blow. Storms lost their sharpest edges. Fault lines released tension gradually rather than violently. Ocean temperatures stabilized just enough to prevent cascading imbalance. No one noticed all of it. But enough people noticed fragments. A climatologist observed that certain catastrophic models consistently failed near the basin's long-range influence. A seismologist noted that stress migrated toward the basin rather than accumulating elsewhere. A sleep researcher found unexplained improvements in global sleep quality during periods of peak basin coherence. Individually, these meant little. Together, they formed a quiet truth. Atlantis was acting as a planetary regulator. Not a shield. Not a solution. A moderator. One night, during a prolonged observation cycle, an anomaly appeared that none of the instruments had been calibrated to expect. For several hours, the basin entered a state of near-perfect equilibrium. Currents aligned. Pressure stabilized across an unusually wide area. Even background seismic noise dropped below detectable levels. It was as though the planet had found stillness. Above the basin, every member of the research crew felt it. Conversations slowed and then stopped. No one issued instructions. Systems continued to function, but human attention drifted inward. Breathing deepened collectively, without coordination. Some sat. Some closed their eyes. No one slept. And yet, no one felt awake in the ordinary sense. In that shared silence, understanding arrived, not as information, but as certainty. Atlantis had not been created to save the world. It had been created to give the world time. Time to adjust. Time to release. Time to choose differently. The Atlanteans had understood that collapse often comes not from catastrophe, but from refusal to pause. From endless continuation beyond balance. They had built something that enforced pause, not through force, but through invitation. The basin invited the planet to rest. After that night, a quiet decision was made. Research would continue, but expansion would stop. No deeper probes. No attempts to amplify or harness the basin's effect. Interference, everyone agreed, would destroy the very thing that made it work. Atlantis required restraint. That decision marked a turning point, not only for science, but for culture. Slowly, without coordination, similar ideas began appearing elsewhere. Movements towards slower living. Toward endings chosen consciously rather than resisted desperately. Buildings designed to age gracefully. Technologies built to power down instead of escalate. Systems allowed to conclude. People spoke of burnout less as failure and more as signal. Rest regained its meaning. Silence regained its value. Atlantis was teaching again. Beneath the ocean, the basin continued its work, unburdened by attention. Sediment settled. Life moved through. Pressure flowed and released. The invisible architecture adjusted itself endlessly, maintaining balance without effort. The city had finally become what it was always meant to be, not a place of habitation, but a function of harmony woven into the planet. And now, as this story continues, it reaches a place beyond plot in the usual sense. The interest lies not in what happens next, but in how gently things can change when allowed to. The ocean remains steady above. The earth breathes more freely below. And the listener, carried by this same rhythm, feels thoughts slow, muscles soften, breath deepen. Atlantis does not return. It does not need to. It continues, quietly, patiently, holding space for rest, just as sleep now holds you, without effort, without demand, guiding everything gently onward.